Good evening, friends. Welcome to our webinar on investment blueprint for balanced strategy. I am Chaitanya Kekre, an equity research analyst with MoneyWorks for me. I request you to please let us know if you can hear my voice clearly. You can let me know through the chat window that is on the left hand side. Yeah, thank you, Murli, for letting me know that you can hear us. Okay, thanks, Yazdi. Thank you very much. We'll start on the webinar for today, that is investment blueprint for balance strategy. So the agenda is we'll be looking at what is called as investment policy philosophy. We'll also look at why do you need an investment philosophy. We'll look into what we mean by risk tolerance and what we mean by risk composure. Uh, what to do if there is some gap in between risk tolerance and risk composure, and then we'll look into investment strategy and asset allocation. Uh, Compared to the way we were telling you about portfolio design over last year, we have added a new element that has to do with your personality. So while the personality is not a standalone subject over here, you'll see to it that over the course of the whole of the presentation, it forms the central theme through which we are going to advise you a particular strategy to be used. So let's begin with our presentation. So what is investment philosophy? One is you need to have a very coherent way of thinking about markets. Uh, at the core, what we mean by investment philosophy is that what do you think about when you think about markets? Do you think about it as if it's a gambling pit? Do you think about it if it is a place where people make errors at time and you can make money out of those errors? Or do you think that the market, whatever it prices about any security, the pricing is done at always at a fair value? That is, the market knows best. So the core is, what do you think the market really is? And at this basic level, what you really need to answer is not what the market is or how you should think about finances. What you need to think about is how humans behave within a group. What do you really think about humans behaving within a group or as an individual? What do you think about humans? That is the very basic that is needed. This will form what is going to be your set of core beliefs about humanity, about the markets, and from that you will start generating strategies. Uh, there is a generally different misconception that I have seen across board, wherein people misconstrue investment philosophy as an investment strategy. Let me give you an example. Sometimes you may see people talking about investing into, let's say, low PE stock. Okay, now investing into low PE stock is a strategy, it's not a philosophy. Philosophy is, in that case, would be you believe that at times market misprices them quite aggressively, and that is why when you buy stocks that are at very low PE and PE being the best uh, proxy or best judgment for identifying such kind of mispricing, then you follow that particular investment strategy. Why is this very important? Because unlike physics or biology or chemistry, investment is not a science. At the end of the day, it deals with real world, it deals with humans. So it is open to all the pits and falls for any social sciences that we have. Things change in this world. Things are extremely dynamic in this world, and things that were seen to be a rule over last year or before that may suddenly now become quite might suddenly become quite an obsolete to speak of. You may have seen this whenever the concerns come in the market. Sometimes the market is more concerned about an currency devaluation, while at other times, even though the currency is getting devalued, it's not much worried about it. You may have seen this at some time when the market is speaks a lot about not investing into companies that are highly leveraged, but at other times it starts giving more value to companies that have much more higher levels of debt. So the reasoning goes behind this is that because people at the end of the day are people, they are going to be fickle. So it's very important for you to identify what you believe at the end of the day people really are. What do you believe that at the end of the day people really think about? And on that basis we will develop an investment philosophy, and once you have an investment philosophy we can then look into what investment strategy will work for you. At times when the none of your investment strategy is working for you, we'll go back to our investment philosophy and see if there a new strategy can be devised. uh, Now the second question that we need to ask is, okay, what if I do not have an investment philosophy? There are three major problems that I see with this. One is you are like a rudderless boat. If you do not have a core set of beliefs in how to move in a highly chaotic place like equity markets, it's very easy that you will become prey for people who sell and quick get quick rich and ideas, and because of that you may be taken for a ride. You may end up losing a substantial amount of your portfolio size, and in worst case even your core capital. So if you have a core set of beliefs, you know what things to avoid for. When I look at market, I do not look at the fact that and in which security I should invest into. That is not the first question I would look at. I would look at there are 5,000 securities that are trading in Indian stock market. Then what are how many I can remove of first for whatever reasons. Sometimes even in a mental block reasons, I remove of them. Uh, After that one, when I get my last set of an certain set of an companies, then these are the companies within which I would like to base my investment into. It's not important then afterwards that if company outside of this set is going and becoming a multi-bagger or is becoming falling down, I will not be looking into, because I do not either understand them or their business model is something which I am not comfortable with. Like I'm personally not very comfortable with companies that deal in uh, cigarettes or tobacco, so I do not invest into it even if they may make value sense. So you need to have some certain core set of belief. Second is what you would the problem with not having an investment philosophy is that at times you would see that uh, buying into low p pays uh, huge amount of return. At other times you may see that uh, buying into companies that are into growth businesses, glamour businesses, those are doing well. Other times you may see that there are certain kind of stocks called as momentum stocks, and putting your money into if you would have put your money into some momentum stock, you would have got 70% return, 80% return in 3 months or 4 months, this kind of way. But what is the problem with this way of thinking is you will just shift from one strategy to other strategy without giving optimum time to allow your current strategy to really give bear fruits. Second, you will shift to strategy that might not be comfortable for you as a person. You might not really be very interested in sitting across the screen daily, looking at stocks and on a minute to minute basis, but you still are entering into something called as intraday type of investment, in which this kind of way of behavior is needed. At the other time you are not someone who is going to track a company quite frequently, and yet you are going to put your money on the basis of certain expected news flow. So shifting from strategy to strategy will not pay much benefit. Shifting from strategy that are within the parts of your core beliefs, yes, that may pay offer much better benefits to you, because you at least know why you are shifting from one strategy to another strategy. So I think I have covered the third point also, that a strategy just should not be selected because other people are making money. You also need to see that it is up to what your risk aversion are towards a particular type of investment, and especially what your personal characteristic is. If you're not a very patient guy, probably patient style of investing is not something that you should really look into. Let's go. So let's move to the first topic. What is your risk tolerance? What do we mean when we say that your risk tolerance is high, your risk tolerance is low? Typically, risk tolerance is what we are measuring is how much is the economic downside you are ready to take. So let's say, given the fact that I have a businessman as my client, let us say, and he is earning about a crore as 1 crore about as investment as uh, amount that he can a surplus amount that he can easily invest into. Now this guy has a much more higher risk than typical income guy, person who is having a regular salary, even if it is a high salary, because at one level this guy has his own business. It is giving him about a crore of investment. Even if he loses about a large chunk of, let's say, 20-25 lakhs, again next year his existing business will give him a cash flow. So, and because of that existing in a business and giving him a cash flow, his appetite to take a risk is much more higher than people who are in much more salaried profession. Okay. Similarly, people who are entering just into their jobs, as a risk tolerance levels, they do not have very high risk. Yes, they can take on more risk because they are quite early on at the investment cycle, but economic setback of even small amount will matter a lot. Let me put an example. In the initial case of that businessman, even if he were to lose around 5 to 6 percentage of his portfolio, it was not something that is going to hurt him a lot. But in the person who is just starting into his job, and if he loses about 5 to 6 percentage of his portfolio, that is something that is going to trouble him much more than what would have troubled the businessman. So even this is what we even suggest to our clients, people who are entering. Your aim is not to enter into high flyers, into high multi-bagger stocks. This will eventually happen into your portfolio also, as you as you move and you learn about how markets behave. Your initial thought process should be that I should not be losing out on the capital. I should be preserving them. You should be committing less amount of mistakes. So risk tolerance measures how much your economic capacity is to take a large amount of risk, how much your economic capacity is to take a risk. If you take lower risk, irrespective of your risk appetite, you have to follow a low risk strategy. Even if you have a very high risk tolerance, if you have a high risk capability, but if you have a low risk tolerance, you should follow a low risk strategy. The next one, variable in the equation is what is a risk composure. Risk composure is a much more mental thing that we are looking into. It's much more how you as a person is, how your brain really thinks about risk. If you, let's say, see an 10-15% loss in your portfolio, what would be your reaction? uh, would you panic? Would you panic and start seeing that this is a 15% loss and I have to get out of it? Things may go really wrong. Or would you start saying, okay, this is just a 15% loss. Let's see if something is available in the market that is cheap, if I have some surplus cash. If not, I have whatever investment that I have made, I know that these investment that I have made have been made. I believe in whatever the stories and valuation that on the basis of which the investment has been made. So my risk composure is much more higher. So in the first case, the guy who is going to panic, his risk composure is going to be very low. Person who is going to be patient and who has much more faith on his ability or on his capacity to have understood the market, his risk composure is going to be very high. Which is a correct way of looking at market? There is no such thing as a right risk composure or a right risk tolerance as such. It is a very individual preference. The right thing to look at it is you need to know clearly what your risk tolerance is and what your risk composure is, and then you need to develop strategies as respect to that. It is not necessary that people with a high risk tolerance and high risk composures will end up getting higher returns. Because when things go bad, they would see much more uh, negative scenario playing out in their portfolio compared to a balanced guy. Balanced guy would see a much more negative things scenarios playing out in the bad time compared to a low risk guy. So which strategy is good over a long term depends a lot upon the person as much as it depends upon the securities that you select. I have seen people who have low risk composures and low risk tolerance, and they buy into a high risk strategy, and because of that they end up losing a substantial amount of their capital. And then unfortunately what happens is people then go and start thinking that there was something fundamentally wrong with the markets, that the markets have been manipulated easily by the brokers or either by promoters, which need not be true always. Uh, Now the question arrives. I presume that in the summarized report that you have got, you would have got at least an indication of what your risk tolerance is, whether it is low, medium, or high. What your risk composure is, low, medium, low, or high. So what to do when these two are not in sync with each other? What I mean by in sync with each other is, if you have a high risk tolerance, it pays to have a very high risk composure. If you have medium risk tolerance, it pays to have a medium risk composure. Uh, Friends, could you please let me know if you can still hear me? I got a confirmation from one of my friends that you people cannot hear me. Can you still hear me? Thank you, Satish. Okay. Oh, sorry. Okay. Uh, so as I was speaking, you need to have a sync in between a risk tolerance and risk composure. Uh, Please understand that a balance in between risk tolerance and risk composure is an idealistic scenario. Some people may have it at some point of time, some people might not have it at some point of time. It will always happen that sometimes your risk tolerance will be a bit higher than your risk composure, sometimes your risk composure will be a bit higher than risk tolerance. So this is an activity of checking whether your risk tolerance is and composure is in sync or not, is an activity that I would suggest you people to take it yearly at least. You need not do it quite frequently, but at least a yearly is something that I would suggest it. Why it happens? Because risk tolerance is something that measures your economic and capacity of taking risk. So as you grow as a professional or as a businessman, your risk tolerance is going to increase, economically speaking. Again, around the time when you're retiring, around the time when you're trying to hand over your business to your kids, again your risk tolerance will again start falling down, because your the cash flows are going to not be so sustainable. Cash flows are not going to be that high and growing as it was when you were at the growth phase of your life cycle. Same way along risk composure side, initially you are a novice. You do not know how the markets really are. How you do not understand much about investment. So your risk composure is also going to be a bit lower. But also sometimes what happens is, जैसे हिंदी में बोलते हैं कि ये ना गरम खून है, और young people sometimes they have believe they have much more higher capacity of taking risk. They are much more prone to taking much more higher levels of risk. So they may have a higher level of risk in other parts of life, but if they do not have knowledge, they make about the investment, they may come with low levels of risk. If they have knowledge, they tend to be at a much more higher risk taking capacity than even the older ones in the market. Now let us see one condition that may happen, that is risk tolerance is much more higher than risk composure. What should you do when risk tolerance is much more higher than your risk composure? uh, what I'm saying is, what should you do when your economic capacity of taking a risk is much more higher than what you are mentally prepared to do? Generally, what we have seen is that people who have low risk composure, part of that low risk composure comes, even if they have very high capacity to take on risk, comes because of the fact that they have very little understanding of the market. They are not putting efforts to understand how valuations happen, how economy things are moving in the economy, how things are shaping up in at a geopolitical and geo-economical level. They are not ready to put an effort towards that. They are more prone to buy into tips of given by other people. Uh, because the way the tips work is, you trust someone, and because you trust someone, you trust the tip that has come from him, rather than checking into what are the underlying assumptions on the basis of which the tip has been made or a recommendation has been made. So once you are bitten once or twice, you become shy about investing into the market, and you automatically decrease your risk composure. People who may have, let's say, started investing in just started investing in the early 2007, they would have seen a substantial drawdown into their portfolio by the time 2008 started rolling in, and they may have just withdrawn themselves from the market, saying that things what they were thinking, or the tips were not working, what they thought about the market was not working. They didn't go back and see whether there was something lacking within their learning about the market itself to increase their kind of ability to take on more risk. So if you have a higher economic ability and you want to take buy into an new much more high risk kind of strategies, then the important part is you understand how this high risk strategies. The best way you can think about is, if the high risk strategies negative scenario plays out, would I still be happy with it? Would I still not be in a trouble by it? That is what the is a basic question that you need to answer to yourself. Let us move to the other way. When your economic ability to take risk is not high, but your risk composure is very high. Typically, this is seen in people who may have had few amount of good luck base of investment. This is also seen in people who are early entrants into the market, but uh, they may have seen some of their friends or peers making easy money, and they think that they can also end up doing similar by buying into options or derivatives. I know a friend of mine who was in the first year of his investment itself, he started dabbling into derivatives and options without really understanding what the negative fallout of derivatives and options could be, and he had to effectively lose out much of his investment that he had made into his portfolio. In the case where the economic ability to take on risk is not high, but an ability of mind to look at risk is very high, you need to control your mind. You need to really be focused on taking just what level of risk you can tolerate economically. You need to have quite a huge amount of balance in not taking high risk. You need to go back continuously and check, this is not a high risk strategy, this is not a strategy wherein I would lose a substantial amount of fund. Because if in the initial period you start losing money, then what is going to happen is that it is very hard to recover your cash. Let's say, look at it this way. Let's say you started by investing a 1 lakh rupees into the market, and in a very high, through using a very high risk strategy, you invested into uh, you invested into certain companies that have very high risk business model, very early stage business model, and by the end of the year you have lost about 50 percentage of your portfolio. If that is what it happens, now see, just to recover back to his initial size, he needs 100% growth. He started with 1 lakh rupees investment, it had fallen by 50 percentage. Now his investment is just 50,000 rupees. uh, to go back to just 1 lakh, he needs a way of investment in which his money needs to double. So in the initial part, if your risk composure is very high and your ability to take on economic risk is very low, you need to focus on taking low levels of risk only. Risk composure itself cannot be the driving towards having a high level of strategy. Now what if in a restaurants and risk composure are in balance? If it's in balance, this is the best place to be in, because harmony is very important in a universe. If you have harmony across your economic ability to take risk and your economic ability to and your ability to take on risk, mentally speaking, then what you would see is that the strategies that you select would be something that will fit to your appetite, both economically as well as what you can see, what you are mentally comfortable with. So these two needs to be in balance. This is the place where you need to reach uh, and stay at as far as possible. This is a very idealistic level. It will happen in each person's life, but over times it will also end up lose out of harmony in both the direction. At times risk tolerance will be high, at times risk composure would be high, but this, your aim should be to strive towards this balance. uh, so now let's come to the question that was the core of our this offer for the February month. Why personality matters in investment? Do personalities really play a role in investment? This is a photo that I would like you to look at. Muppet. Yes. Uh, no, it is deleted. ऐसा क्या है? तेरे को दिखता है ना? तेरे को भी नहीं दिख रहा। Friends, just give me a minute. Let me see why you cannot see the slides. बोलो क्या प्रॉब्लम है? इसलिए तो एक काम कर रहा हूँ। एक काम करो। ये तुम्हारे इसमें लगाओ, मेरे को मालूम पड़ेगा कि क्या स्लाइड चल रहा है। आपके इसमें लगाओ। हाँ, हाँ, हाँ। हम्म, you can see. Yeah. हाँ, फिर ये डालो चैट में कि दिख रहा है क्या स्लाइड। अब मपेट्स का स्लाइड दिखना चाहिए, बोलो। आवाज आ रहा है? Friends, Yazdi, can you just let me know if you can see the slide? I would be highly grateful to you. Yes. Okay, can you see that Moffat photo? Okay, thanks Murli, and thanks Yazdi. Uh, yeah, if you look at this photo, I picked up this photo because Muppets was a very popular and children's show, and each of the Muppets had a very different kind of personality, and it was as per this personality as per which he was behaving within the whole of the show. There were some who were truly very evil. There were some who were neutral. There was some person who was evil and based on just on a lawful basis. I see something similar way of looking at things when I look at Simpsons. There are some who just wanted to have a huge amount of bang of time. There are some who by nature itself were very naughty one. Others who were extremely funny ones. So personality plays a huge important role in how you approach towards your life. Investment is just one of the aspects of your life, and therefore how you behave with respect to your investment is also extremely important. So now I ask a simple question to you: if we all are different, then does one size fits all really works? What I mean by this is sometimes you see some tip being made. Excuse me. Sometimes you see some company being recommended on either TV shows or some or on an among your friend circle or on an, some investment groups that you see. What you need to really answer is does this company really make sense to you as a person? Does the risk that entails into buying into this company or buying into this financial assets will open you to another type of risk that you are not comfortable with? uh, this is what I have problem with mutual fund as a strategy. Yes, the best part of having a mutual fund is that a professional looks into how an investment needs to be made. But what you need to also understand is that mutual fund cannot satisfy each and every person's different strategy profile. So let's say you are a very conservative investor. You invested in sometime in 2007, and by 2008 you would have seen that and you have investment portfolio through mutual fund, the NAVs would have fallen by 50 percentage. Why take just an extreme key year like 2007, 2008? Let's just take 2010. If you would have invested in 2010, by end of 2011, your portfolio would not have increased by more than 10-15%, and it would have seen at least 30-35 percentage of loss in between these two periods. If you're a conservative person, your initial behavior would be that mutual fund does not really works for you, and you should not be investing through mutual fund. Actually, the answer is not that mutual fund does not really works for you. It is that the mutual fund might not be the best strategy to invest into. It is not that the mutual fund is not doing its job. It is just that mutual fund might not be the way through which you need to be making your financial investment. You need to be looking at either a mutual fund that is extremely conservative, or you should be looking at mutual fund, or you should be making your financial investment with the help of a financial advisor into a very conservative way of investment. On the other hand, if you would have been a very aggressive guy, you would have increased your amount of investment that you were making into using a mutual fund. Again, it might not have worked if in 2008 you started investing very aggressively, and by 2010-11 you would have seen that over to, while 2009 was a spectacularly good year for you, 2010 things were not really moving as you wanted to move. So now let's look into what one of the most celebrated professor Aswath Damodaran really says about and personality and philosophy as such. He says that the basic question that you need to answer is not what strategy to employ first. You need to answer is, are you a patient guy or impatient guy? If you are an impatient guy, probably then patient oriented strategies will not necessarily work for you. Second question is, how do you respond to peer pressure? Many a times I see that people buy into a stock just because somebody else is buying into a stock. I see that people buy into an investment strategy just because their friends are buying into an investment strategy and it is making money for them. Third question that he says investor needs to ask himself is, are you a worrier? Meaning, do you worry a lot whether the price of your or the value of your portfolio is going up and down regularly? Do you check your in a portfolio, let's say every day, or do you check very infrequently? And when you see a 20% or 25% fall in your investment, are you going to start worry about it, or are you going to see it as if it gives you buying into a portfolio of your own stocks that you already have at much more cheaper level? Fourth question that you need to answer is, are you a detail oriented person or are you a big picture person? Let me explain what I mean by that. A detail oriented person would not buy typically into a growth company. He would need to have quite a lot of data points that he needs to see before he substantiates whatever his thought process or hypothesis may be, and then he will start and make an investment. A big picture person, on the other hand, would be a person who makes a much more early stage investment. He would look at let's say a windmill company, and he would see that yes, oil is going to get eventually, at least oil is going to be finished in from the earth, and then you need to have certain renewable energy. So his way of investment style would be a much more bigger picture. He will not look at whether the Suzlon or whether in some any other company in solar or hydro is it really making money or not. He'll just see that eventually they would really start making so, and eventually this is what is needed, so these kind of businesses are going to succeed. It's not necessary whether the one strategy is better than the other strategy, but your strategy has to be framed with respect to what type of a person you really are. So when we requested you to take a test of your personality, that personality test was broadly giving you an outcome into 4 parts. It was trying to answer after that uh, torturous probably session of 70 questions. It was just telling you whether you were a rational guy, an artisan, a guardian, or an idealist. Now, the way I formed this in quadrant is very significant. Rational and guardian, the way we look at it, are going to have a bit riskier strategies than artisan and idealist. This, why is it so? I'll try and make it clear in the following slides as far as possible. Uh, uh, So in nutshell, what I'm trying to tell you guys is we all are very differently designed. Because we are very differently designed in the way we think about everything, we need to have very differently designed strategies for our investments too. We cannot have the same common strategies across the world. If this would have been done in investing into markets would not have been really an interesting thing. We are very differently designed, that's why we need a very differently designed strategies for each one of us too. Now let's bring all this together. What all three together I mean by this is, let's bring the personality together, let's bring the risk tolerance and risk composure together for a minute, so that I can lay out my framework, and then I can re-enter into explaining all the four types of personalities. Now, this design of how a portfolio needs to be designed was initially proposed by Professor Mia Statman. Uh, he showed that a portfolio, an optimal portfolio can be designed as if it is a pyramid. It is a mix of a certain types of portfolios which meet certain type of criteria of yours based on where in your life cycle you are, or where in your economic cycle you are. Let's take the vertical axis to be the investment risk. The higher you go, the investment risk starts increasing. At the bare minimum level that you want is, you need to satisfy your shelter and food. This is the basic requirement that you want. I also assume that at this level you do not have substantial saving to make your investment. This would be typically true for a person who is just landed his first job. He just is looking out for his shelter and his food. He's not looking out so much for an investment as such. Some of the lucky ones in the first job, or eventually within the next 2 or 3 years, he will start trying to build a lifestyle for himself. There is some amount of savings that he is making, but again within that he wants very tax efficient. His way of investing is just to see to it that he just clears off that 1 lakh to 2 lakhs whatever is given within the ATC, plus on your housing loan that you can take on. uh, uh, Basic his aim of just taking on risk is just to protect his lifestyle. Even after his retirement, he would like to maintain this kind of lifestyle that he is living into. So his just aim is that if he is taking home today 5 lakh rupees, he would like that inflation adjusted, uh, uh, that is the amount he would like to have as a corpus, which can fund his pension of 5 lakhs, inflation adjusted, even after he has retired, so that he can maintain his lifestyle. Second is, now I have a person who has a shelter and food, who has lifestyle. Now he is looking at creating some amount of wealth. Uh, the reason for creating wealth can be for the dynastic purpose. You want to, when you have retired, you or when you approach your death, you would like to give away some part of your wealth to your children, to your heirs, to your hereditary progenies. And second, you may be more of an philanthropy oriented person. You may would like to give it back to your society, either to your school or either to your, the village that you were coming from. You had certain dreams initially when you thought that you would like to have a very good school at your village, but this is only going to possible once you have create a certain amount of wealth. So in this kind of a people, what we suggest is a balanced portfolio. People should look at a balanced portfolio for just this chunk, that is a chunk in between the lifestyle and the flexibility side. uh, Next, you are actively looking at philanthropy, but you are not really making a philanthropic investment. Just you wanted that if things would really pan out, you would like to make a philanthropic investment. But balanced growth portfolio looks at that you have cleared your dynastic requirement, and post that you want a philanthropy. But again, this philanthropy, you are not going to do an active philanthropy, as in you are not going to have your own NGO, your own personal NGO making a philanthropic investments into the society, like the way Melinda Gates Foundation works. But you may be putting substantial amount of money into, let's say, giving out to some non-governmental organization, non-profit organizations, who would uh, with whose ideas you subscribe to, and you believe that this money will be better served. Post For these kind of people, for this stage is what you should be looking at, balanced growth portfolio. The next is again followed by dynastic. Once you have done with philanthropy, you want to give away a huge large chunk of your wealth to your there is no limit to how large you want this to be. So you need to be looking at a much more aggressive levels of strategies. Now the question is this the pyramid that you are going to move in, as if in the initial you start with personal, you start with flexibility, then philanthropy or dynastic? No, it is not that way. The way we mean is that part of your portfolio has to look out for your personal requirement that is going to maintain your lifestyle. Then another part of your portfolio has to look out for a flexibility oriented portfolio, as in things that will help you if possible do some active philanthropy. If not, and at least help you give over some amount of wealth to your kids and to your other grandsons, granddaughters probably. Followed that, you may need some part of your portfolio that if it plays out well, you may probably give a massive donation, a good donation to meet whatever social obligations maybe with respect to the society, social ideas maybe with respect to the society. And followed by that, you would needs to have some aggressive strategies within your portfolio itself that would look after creating a huge large chunk of wealth. Now how much the size should be for each one of them will vary across how a person is. Like for some people, the lifestyle oriented may be a very large chunk, and dynastic oriented may be very small, not increasing more than 3 to 4 percentage of their portfolio. For some other kind of people, dynastic may be a very large chunk, let's say 15-20 percentage, and lifestyle and shelter and food oriented might not be very large. It would be at least 15-20% less than what it was in the previous case. I, I hope this part is clear to you. You guys, I will be coming back to this frame of reference again in later part of my presentations. If you have any doubts on this, please let me know on the chat window. I will take that at that time again. Uh, Now, having understood this, how should you be putting out your portfolio? You should clearly write and state what your main goals are. Uh, Let me go back to the first slide. In order to understand this pyramid very simply, you can simply think of it this way. Can you go back to your wife and say simply this way, dear, I have made investment such that if things are even normal, we should be maintaining our lifestyle even in as we go out into the retirement. And if things go really well, we can go for a world tour. This is the way you need to look at when you look at this in a pyramid. Now let's come back to the next slide. So the first step that you need to focus on is you need to describe very clearly as in a detail as possible what your main goals are. If you have kid, what do you think and what you are planning for your kid, whether you are planning him to become a doctor or an engineer, how do you are looking at things in your life. If you are planning for a world tour, what kind of world tour are you looking at? So you need to plan out this part. Once you have made your goals clear, you need to put a certain dollar weightage or weightage as per how, which is the much more important goal, which is the least important goal. So you may say that my son becoming a doctor or engineer or a CA is much more important goal than me going on a world tour. If that is so, then you need to be very risk averse on that side. That is money that you will put into through which your child's future is secure, but you can take a much more higher risk with the money that is going to fund your world tour, because if it happens you are okay, if it does not happens you are a little bad off, but it's not something that is going to trouble you. Once you have put some kind of weightage into what this each of the goals are, then you can create a portfolio that satisfies each goal. Let's take it very simply. In the first case where it's concerned with your child, probably some guaranteed insurance or wealth management plan which guarantees a certain amount of return by the time your son becomes 21 or 18 years old, or your daughter becomes 18-year old, may actually work better than putting that money into equities, and that too with a very high risk component in it. Because if this do not work out, your son is going to be left helpless at that time, or your daughter is going to be left helpless at that time when that money is really needed. But if you are looking at and doing a very large wedding for your son or daughter whenever he plans to marry, or you are looking at going on a world tour, or you are looking at and buying a Harley Davidson for yourself, and you are okay if you end up buying Harley Davidson or something lesser than it, let's say Royal Enfield, in if that is the way of it, then this is the part in which the money that you are going to allocate for this, you can take a substantial amount of risk, so that if this goal meets, it's okay. If it does not meet, you are okay with it. Once you have created such portfolios, we'll then optimize it, and this is something that you need to do it each year and year out, because your goals will change, you as a person, your priorities will change, you as a human being will change. So this is an objective that you should try and do at each part of your life and in every year as far as possible. So now let's look at how rational behave. This is the cartoon that best describes how rationals really look at things. Rationals typically look at anything as if it is a problem. Uh, Let me start off with telling you who are the most famous rationals. That way, it will be very easy for me to uh, that way it would be very easy for me to put my point across. The most famous rationals were Albert Einstein, Newton, Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, George Soros, Jack Welch, and Steve Wozniak. If you look at these people, then most of the time they looked at anything was as if this was a problem. When Steve Jobs came after came back to Apple in 1997, the things that were going wrong at Apple, he thought of it more like it was a problem and it needed to be solved. If you would like, I would request that some of you can go and look at Steve Jobs' presentation that he made at Macworld at 1997. It's available at YouTube. You will see that the way of his approach was: this is a problem. My markets are Apple is not satisfying its customers where it's needed. It has certain core places where it's good. It has certain core other places where it is not good. We need to leverage. This is a way of thought process that is a much more problem centric oriented. A problem centric oriented is guy is also a very detail centric oriented guy. He needs to see data. He needs to see evidences. He will look out for these things. He'll approach on a much more logical frame of reference, at least as far as he thinks he has been logical, as far as he thinks he's been rational enough. He'll approach a problem this way. So his typical way of investment would also be this way. He would think that, okay, I need to make about 15% return, then how can I make my 15% return? So he would, let's say, in that if he sees that 2007 was 8 was not a good year, he will not panic from it. He will rather go back and see whether there was a mistake in the market, whether I didn't understand something about the market, or whether uh, market itself is flawed and I need to take benefit out of it. He would go back, drill himself. He'll go through annual reports. This is the kind of guy who will go through reports. He will go through an investment analysis. He'll speak with a lot of people. He'll try and identify what was the problem, how I can solve this problem that is being created into my portfolio. And because of this very nature of his, rationals typically can take a very high level of risk, because their way of thinking of it is this may be a very high risk strategy for a common guy, but because I understand the level of risk that is involved in this kind of investment, I have a competitive advantage in it. So let's see a very hypothetical case. Rational may today may believe, some rational guy may believe that investing into Suzlon may be a multi-bagger of 10 times or so. He has done a complete analysis of it and he really believes that. So what he would end up doing it, he also realizes that there is a 50-50% chance that it will be a 10 bagger, and 50% chance that it would be just go to zero. So you would probably look at just 4% or 5% without anybody telling him, because if it does goes 10 percentage, 5 percentage of that goes to 10 times will mean that his portfolio will effectively increase by at least 45 percentage, 5 percentage being capital and 45 percentage being the growth. If things go bad, then his portfolio will suffer just a 5% loss, that is the loss of the capital, which is something that he may be very comfortable in losing out. So this is how a rational typically behaves. So based on the survey that we have conducted with you, uh, and to whom we have suggested a balanced strategy, and if you are rational, uh, you typically have this kind of a risk tolerance level, that is, you have a very low risk tolerance because of economic basis, or you are just entering into some sort of a medium risk tolerance levels. You're just not you have just started getting your first level of substantial savings that you can make, in through which you will start building up your portfolio. So in both the cases we are suggesting a balanced portfolio, because economically you have low up to medium levels of risk. On a composure basis, even though you are a rational guy, uh, you also have a low to medium levels of risk on a composure basis. So looking at all three, risk tolerance, risk composure, and you've been rational, we are suggesting a bit aggressive strategy than others, but it is still a balanced strategy. It is a still balanced strategy. If you would like to enter into a high side of high risk oriented strategy, things that I would advise you is to, and one, you need to start seeing factoring in keep at what stage of life you are, and at what stage you would be reaching a very high risk tolerance levels, high economically risk tolerance levels. And second, because you are a rational oriented guy, I would assume that you will continuously be training yourself in this thing, and you would over a period of time start increasing your risk composure. Risk rational guy typically believe that over a period of time will start moving from the left hand side top corner to a right hand side bottom corner, of moving towards high risk strategies, high risk tolerance levels. Bare minimum, even if economically things do not go well for you, unfortunately, let us say you are someone who is going to be in between, say, uh, okay, Satish, I'll try and see that audio is good. Thanks for letting me know. Audio पर बने हैं क्या? I believe that a rational guy will move from this left hand side corner to a right hand, just left hand side top corner to a right hand side top corner. So rationals would be of this kind of people. Let's move to our next guy. I am a great fan of Star Wars. I love all the Star Wars series. At times, I've spent the whole of my Sunday just watching all the Star Wars and series one after the other. And the character that and and the character that interested me a lot was Yoda. Now, Yoda was a kind of guy who believed in rules. He who believed in things being on rules being followed every time. He believed in stability. He believed in harmony. He believed in working in a team. He believed in the fact that we as a society overall has to do well, and it is not just that the power should be concentrated on just one type of a person. Yoda best signifies what a guardian typically is at his heart. He is a workhorse. He's a workhorse. He'll work very hard, but he's also a very rule and procedure oriented guy. Uh, for this kind of a person, because he will have very he would have a huge methodical plan. He would meticulously execute it. He would go through a very structured approach towards investment. Along with rationals, we believe that guardians can also go for a relatively riskier strategies than compared to other two personalities, based on the fact that he's very systematic, he's very meticulous, he plans out his things in a very systematically way. So if you see, there is not much difference in the way of strategy that we are recommending for a rational oriented guy with similar levels of risk tolerance and risk composure levels as it was with respect to a rational guy. In the rational guy, he might not be very systematic guy, but he by nature is going to look into details a lot. On the guardian side, he might not look into details a lot, but he has his own process. He has his own methodical approach towards the thing. And that is why we believe that both of them can go a bit more higher level of risky strategies than others, given their risk tolerance and risk composure levels. Let's move to how artisan behaves. Let's see, let's the slide change and then I go. Okay, so let's see how artisans behave. Artisans typically think of investment as if it is an art. They believe that investment is an art, which it is to some extent, but it is also based on certain premises that also needs to be satisfied. But artisans believe that it is much more like an art, and investing into equity markets isn't something that is art and is not open to logic and reason. This is what they would like to believe, but what actually they end up happening is uh, they end up let the slide change. They end up gambling away their portfolio. So if I look at a typical an artisan, his risk composure would be very high, but this is the type of risk composure that you do not high risk composure that you really do not want to have when you are making your investments. This type of risk composure is good when you are probably looking at a part of your portfolio that is oriented towards just your creating your huge amount of future wealth that you want to pass on as inheritance. But it is not good when you are looking at your lower levels of an investment requirement, that is for your lifestyle maintenance and for your basic some amount of inheritance to be passed on to your kids, some amount of philanthropy to be done by you. This is not a very good strategy for an artisan, and this is a risk that artisans are always exposed to. That is, they may approach investment as an art, and in the process they might not try and learn about what is really happening in the market, and because of that they may gamble away their portfolio. So if you look at compared to rationals and compared to guardians, you will see that even for a person which has a very high risk tolerance, a person who has huge economic capability of taking on risk, we are still suggesting him to have a very balanced portfolio. This is very different from rationals and guardians, because we believe that there is a substantial risk that because of artisans and uh, not less desire towards learning about the market, and belief about investing is more an art rather than a methodical approach, systematic approach, or doing a problem solving type of approach, uh, looking into logical way of reasoning for an investment side of working. We are still suggesting him a very balanced portfolio rather than risky portfolio, relatively speaking. Now, how does an idealist behave? An idealist is a person who will buy into ideals. The people that come to my mind as far as big leaders go are Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, Franklin D. Roosevelt, Theodore Roosevelt, Vladimir Lenin, the person who led the Bolshevik revolution in Russia. These were all people who believed in an utopian idea, and they at some level sought to achieve it. Uh, by the end of it, while they realized that they could not achieve the ideas to complete, but they did achieve to a substantial part what they sought out for, but it was not the ideal that they would not have been really satisfied with what the outcome was in the end. But this was how things happen. So idealist typically has a lot of inner moral strength in pursuing whatever goals he believes in, but at the end of the day he looks at the world through an utopian tinted vision. He has a certain utopian look at world. This is a utopia that is within his own mind. It might not be true with respect to other people, but this is how he would look at it. The best case example that I look at these days is people who typically who would have voted for Obama when Obama came in 2008, with a rallying cry of "Yes, we can." Many of the idealists, I believe, would have taken up his view, and unfortunately, some of them were also the people who were judging him for Nobel Prize winner, because I have never seen someone getting a Nobel Prize without uh, just based on a marketing slogan of yes we can, without he really doing something. So he really led the whole of the idealist bunch who, and probably it may have been helped because of all the crisis situation that was happening at that time, but idealist people would have bought into him. Because of this way, that idealist typically buys into how things may happen. uh, 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 just like a artisan, if he has a high risk tolerance but a medium low to medium composure of risk composure, we are again suggesting a balance strategy. Same way, like even if he has high risk tolerance, high composure but a very low risk tolerance, again we are suggesting a balance strategy. The underlying principle goes that while idealistic person can be a very forceful personality, he is at the end of day idealistic person and much more likely to be taken up by an ideal and utopian and a way of looking at things, rather than seeing that investing into any equity is like investing into gray matters. You do not generally get companies who have very bad corporate governance, who are like extremely shady, criminal oriented companies. And at other times you also do not get companies who are if I can say angelic, very godly oriented companies. Companies will lie in between these two extreme scales, and that's why investment that needs to be made has to be made as if it is a gray matter. Again, valuations, it is not as if you'll even in the good times if you remember, uh, there was a pressure on companies even in 2006 and 2007 with respect to their growth plans. In 2008 2009 nobody was asking about their growth plans, but the pressure was how they will deleverage their balance sheet, how they are going to maintain their profitability. So pressure on the business is always going to be there. You'll never get a company at very low valuations with very strong brand. Excuse me. You'll never get a company with very low valuations, very strong brand, with no risk in the business. This kind of a scenario might never play out. And because of this kind of scenario never playing out, we believe that idealistic people should at least approach to the market with a balance oriented. uh, when I go into the breakup of the funds, I would make it much more clearer on what I mean, how what type of companies typically, and each one of you should be looking at. So this was a framework I had spoken about in past, uh, about 15-20 minutes back. That was a framework suggested by Mia Statman. Let me give it a time to come on the slide. Uh, I think it has hanged again. Uh, and just give me a moment. You might not be seeing slide for some time. I'll just get back. Just give me a moment. Uh, Presenting recording of this webinar. Um, okay, so let's move back to our presentation. Probably today I'm having some internet troubles, because of which the slides are at times not moving at optimum speed. I'm extremely sorry for that. This was a framework that uh, we were looking at the start. Please do let me know from the chat window if this framework was clear to you, so I can move it. If this was not, then I'll tend to start answering that. Uh, you can let me know through the chat window. Uh, Just let me know if this framework is clear to you on how to approach towards your investment by breaking your own portfolio into at least 4 to 5 different portfolios that look at satisfying different needs of yours. Uh, the size of this portfolio would be dependent on how you individually look at what is important for you at all these 4 levels. That is your personal requirement, your flexibility requirement, your philanthropic requirement, and your dynastic requirement. Uh, Personal requirement being a requirement that would satisfy your lifestyle even once you are retired, once you are out of the workforce. Second, flexibility requirement would be initial start of your active philanthropic investment and some small amount of uh, wealth management so that you can pass on some wealth to your uh, hereditary to your progenies. Second, maybe a philanthropic requirement, and the last one being the dynastic requirement. I hope this framework is clear to you. I think it is. If not, just keep do post your question on the chat. I will take it at the end of the presentation. Uh, Again, I hope this framework is also clear to you on how to approach towards identifying your goals, prioritizing aim. This is a very important thing because once you have done that, only then can you go back to developing your investment pyramid. uh, I assume that this is also clear, uh, as there are no questions. Okay, so the fund allocation strategy that we are suggesting you is a balanced fund. Uh, uh, it being a balanced fund, we recommend at least that you put about 40 percentage of your investment through equities, another 40% through fixed income, and about 20 percentage of your investment into real estate. I need to put some caveats over here. Real estate, when you look at as investment, is an investment real estate. It is not the primary home that you are staying into, because please understand that if you have bought a home, you are also consuming it by staying in it. So it does not qualify as an investment as such. Investment should be something that if you get a good offer, you can sell it, and it will not put you at substantial trouble as such. So if you have a second homes that is rented out, second house that you are looking at from investment perspective, some commercial real estate property, gold, other commodities, precious commodities, that will classify as real estate. So that should be about 20 percentage. So your primary home would not come under this type of fund allocation. We believe it is not investment, it is much more a consumption. So it is much more an expenditure than just an investment. Now there is something that to be known: equity and fixed income both are at 40-40, but what I would like to do it, ideal way of looking at it is when markets are at its near peak, which if you stay with us, you will and we will be very proactively trying to inform you. Very simple metric like Sensex at MRP is a very good way of looking at if markets have reached its peak. Historically, we have seen that whenever markets reach near its peak, it is close to an hour MRP, and once that is there, we generally see a good amount of correction. So Sensex and MRP were touched by market in the month of January, and after that we have seen about 6 to 7% cut. The only time it didn't happen was in 2007 when our MRP was about 10 to 15% less than what the market was. But that again is very significant thing to note is that the market stayed up above our MRP for just about a 1 to 1.5 month, and after that, when it corrected, the correction was a very much more steeper one. So Sensex and MRP is a very good way of looking at if the markets are near its peak. So if its markets are near its peak, you should be moving about 20% of your equity investment that you have made, that is out of 40, 20 you should continue to keep into equity, but 20 that you have made, you should transfer it to your fixed income. So your fixed income would be 60 percentage of your portfolio, 20 percentage would be your equity, and real estate will be another 20 percentage if when the equity markets are near its peak. When the equity markets are near its bottom, typically when there is a huge divergence between what Sensex at MRP is or Nifty at MRP is with respect to Sensex at Nifty that is quoting in the market, then You can go the other way. You can reduce your fixed income investment from 40 to 20 percentage and divert that 20 percentage into equity. This way, that 20 percentage that is moving from fixed income to equity would be risk hedging your portfolio from any untoward risk happening uh, in either side. Now let's look at how you should be breaking up your equity portfolio as such. I typically divide the type of companies into six types. Uh, let's move in a clockwise fashion. There are certain companies that are value picks. Value picks, as in these are the companies whose market cap may be very low, but if this company was to go private or if this company was to liquidate itself, the amount of money that they can raise is substantially very high than the market cap that is signaled by their current share price. So uh, companies like Mercator Lines, companies like Shipping Corporation of India, companies like Maharashtra Seamless. These are the type of companies which are value picks. Their book value is much more lesser than their market cap, and because of that, and if this company were to, if theoretically speaking, liquidate, then they would give back their shareholders much more larger amount of money than what their shareholders today paying for by buying into their shares. So this is a company that is a typically value pick. This is a company that is typically not recognized as having value as of now, but eventually when the market will recognize, you tend to get a substantial investment in it. People who are followers of Ben Graham typically tend to invest into this kind of companies. Value investment is this kind of investment. You buy into company wherein you're paying for the tangible asset, which is selling at very lower price than what the market they would have sold if the company was being liquidated. Uh, yeah, I mean, Abhilash, mean that that is one metric. Book value has to be greater than market cap. But the problem with book value is also a historical number. So let's say if I look at LIC's balance sheet today, the LIC is in a Yogakshem building at Mumbai, Narim. At Fort is valued at just 1 rupee. So I do believe that 15 store building at a fort in Mumbai would not be just selling for 1 rupee. Its value would be in somewhere running around crores. So book value has that problem that because the valuation is done at a historical level and the cost may have really moved up as of now. Book value would be very really understated. But yes, this is one metric. Book value should be greater than market cap. But the real metric that you need to be looking at is if we are to sell every asset that it has on its books, it, let's say it should sell its, if it ends up selling its plant, if it ends up selling it's an land holding, it's an a building, uh, inventory that it has, and also pay off whatever debt it has, and the value then remaining is much more higher than the market cap that the company has. Yes, this is a value company. This is a company in which there is large value locked into the company than the market is really realizing into. Uh, Cases like Dabur had this kind of thing. There was substantial land holding locked into the company's asset, which was not really factored into the book value also because it was at a historical valuations. But once Dabur had an active policy of monetizing those assets, and its market cap really took off. The next company is cyclical companies. We recommend that as a part of your balanced fund allocation, you should have just 10 percentage of your investment into cyclical. Cyclicals are companies wherein the business itself goes through ups and downs based on the economic cycle that it is in. Typically, commodity oriented companies, capital goods company, they both agri commodity as well as metal commodities, they go through certain type of cycles. So during the good runs, what happens is in the initial part of the year, you would see that the companies are really minting money. The profits are growing at 2 to 3 times of what was over last year. The margins, which was just 2%, 3%, or even at sometimes at loss, has really expanded to 10%, 15% profit margins. Second, another good factor to look at it is that in the later part of this upcycle, companies would also be coming up with a very aggressive capacity creation cycle, and the moment this capacity creation cycle then starts peaking up, the capacity start coming into the market. What happens is that now there is initially we started with more demand than supply, but then in the later part we start with more supply and lesser relatively lesser demand, and because of that you see margins falling, you'll see, and the profit taking a degrowth rather than a growth, and a cycle turning and towards negative. So in cyclicals, it is important to identify good cyclical companies. You do not want that a cyclical companies go through a debt restructuring. You do not want company go through a bankruptcy like case because of taking on high levels of debt in the positive cycle. If I can give an example, India Cements is this kind of company. Uh, they have very aggressive plans, and they took on a huge amount of debt to create those capacities, but by the time these capacities started coming online in South India, uh, the market in South India was really bad for cement companies, and India Cement had to bear a huge amount of burnt because of it. So you need not would like to buy a company like India Cements, but if you would have looked at a company like Shree Cement or JK Lakshmi or even the Big Four, they would have given you a very good returns on your investment, especially if you would have invested into northern no, northwestern companies like Shree Cement or JK Lakshmi or JK Cement. Here you would have seen that over a period of just 2 to 3 years, over a period of just 1.5 to 2 years, your value in it grew from about just 100 rupees to about 300 or 350 rupees. So cyclicals give a good return. There is a substantial risk built in it. That's why it's just kept at 10 percentage. But if you can buy into a okay type of a company, you need not be a good company, even a okay type of a company in the bad time, then in the good time, the returns that it can give to your portfolio can be very substantially large. Uh, Turnarounds are very risky oriented companies. These are companies wherein there was a problem over certain period of time. They were making losses. They had nearly a good brush with an risk of bankruptcy, and but now they are doing okay. They are now slowly the margins are coming in, slowly cash flow is coming in. A good example would be Vocard. If you would have invested in Vocard by just looking at the news flow of Vocard, not even the valuations of Vocard, just looking at news flow of Vocard in the late 2011 uh, to mid 2011 period, you would have had about 120% return in just 6 to 7 months. Turnarounds give good return, but there is a substantial risk because there is a risk of you losing out your whole capital. So let's say if tomorrow Suzlon or Tata Steel becomes a can become a turnaround company, but if you were to invest into Suzlon and Tata Steel, you need to also start factoring that there is a risk that the money that you put into might not come back to you, or even if it comes back, it will come back so late that effectively you might not have made really any good returns. I know a case of one of my friend's father investing into IFCI in the year 1994-93, and he didn't see his money growing till 2006 or 2007. So that is a substantial about it, more than a decade. So while he did get about 5 times of his returns, but because of that decade that it took, real returns were not that high. He would have done much better if he would have invested into some larger companies than into a company like IFCI. Now, stalwarts are different kinds of companies. Stalwarts are companies that typically have done very well. They have had consistent value creation. These are also companies that have very good brands. Uh, FMCGs are, yes, likely prospects for this, but even other than FMCG, companies in paints, pharma, uh, even some companies in commodity sector, if they have had very consistent value creation, like say Ambuja Cement or uh, say Ambuja Cement, and till pre 2007, even to some extent Reliance, but now it has not been really been doing well. But yes, these are the kind of companies that will be called as for stalwarts. They typically grow at a bit more than the GDP growth, nominal GDP growth rate. That is, nominal GDP growth rate is the GDP growth rate that you see, that is as of now going at 5%, 5.5% plus the inflation rate. So we'll be having a nominal GDP growth rate somewhere around 11 to 12 percentage this year. So these companies will be growing their revenues at and profits at more than 12 percentage growth rate year on year sustainably, and they are creating huge amount of value for their shareholders. The good way to look at it is these companies typically are very well respected in their industries. They also have very strong brands and very strong competitive advantage in each and every sector that they are dealing into. It's always possible that you can have one or two stalwarts with very different strategies in the same industry also. The next is growth companies. 20 percentage we are asking you to put your money into growth companies. The reason to put 20 percentage into growth companies are that part of these growth companies are going to be tomorrow's stalwarts. They are trying to create a new business model. They are trying to create substantially they are into a business in which the revenues are growing at more than 30-35 percentage rates. This is not a sustainable rate, but yes, they are in the growth phase as of now, so they are growing at this rates. So if you buy at right valuations, their earnings growth and their revenue growth that they are seeing, this will also start translate into your share price growth, because as they grow and become larger, there will be substantial and realization by the market of the value that these companies are creating. So to certain extent, Jubilant Foodworks could classify as a growth company, though you need to check whether it is at available to you at right valuations, because if you don't buy it at right valuation, especially with a growth company, what would happen is that uh, if you would have seen this time's result post next day of an result after Jubilant Foodworks, it grew its earnings by 30 percentage. If I just tell you this, that a company grew its earnings by 30 percentage, this is a substantial growth. But the once the result were announced, next day the stock fell by 10 percentage. The reason for it falling by 10 percentage was because market was factoring it an growth rate of 40-45 percentage. If it was looking at Jubilant Foodworks as a very hyped up growth stock, but if it could not deliver 40 to 45 percentage growth, you will see a substantial correction. So this is a very predominant risk in growth companies. But if this risk does not plays out, the returns that the growth company can give you can be really very good. So to summarize, this is how I look at markets. Laggards, just to come back, laggards are companies that are slow moving. These are companies that have never created value in their business. Typical example can be Escorts. Neither growth in sales, neither in a value creation. That Videocon, the last time I heard that it had really done well was during the Harshad Mehta time. Otherwise, after that, I have never really seen that stock do really well. It has just fallen down from the um, of mental awareness of most of the investors also. It has not created much wealth for its shareholders. So laggards are these kind of companies you need not have nobody actually should have any laggards in their portfolios. Now one clear key thing to note is these five types of companies: value, cyclicals, turnarounds, stalwarts, and growth. It's always possible that the company that you buy into may have two or three themes running into, meaning you may have a company that is a value company. It may also be a turnaround company and also be a cyclical company. Let's take an example. Let's say BHEL is today available to you at a price to book value of less than 1, then it's a value company. But it is also going through a very and a bad cycle as far as an investment in powers is made. And let's say hypothetically saying that it has not been making a profit, it has been in some small amount of loss, so then BHEL will classify as all the three type, that value, cyclical, and turnaround. But if not, hypothetically saying, at least really saying, BHL is as of now both a value peak as well as would be a cyclical peak. So this is how we would like you to make an allocation. The major part of this content would also be made available to you in the detailed report. There may be some delay from our side because of lots of things that we are building for you in our website, lots of new products that we are creating into a website, but they should come into your email box by the end of the first week of March. And this would have much of the content of whatever we have discussed, whatever ideas I have given, probably a bit more than what I have discussed today. If you have any query, please let me know right now in the chat window. If not, you can always get back to us through the customer care. and we'll be very very happy to take your questions. So with this I would like to end the presentation. Just let me know through the chat window if you have any queries. I am very happy to I'll be delighted to answer those questions. Yeah, Manish, we will be sending the webinar, recorded webinar back. So you will have the link to the complete webinar in future. Uh, can you identify value cyclicals, stalwarts, and growth? Uh, not directly, indirectly, yes. We are creating filters for you so that you can also look at these companies directly also. But time being, a typical value company would be a company that is a green company. Uh, it has a green. It has had green 10-year X-ray. Uh, it has green and a future prospects, but might not have green and a short-term prospects. Uh, it will be trading at price to book value of less than one. The thing that you need to see once and our new 10-year X-ray is also up is that you need to see a consistent value creation. For that, in the 10-year X-ray, you can look at a factor called as ROIC, that is return on invested capital minus weighted average cost of capital. That line has to be a consistent green performance. Cyclicals, bit tricky. Again, similarly, they might be both green and orange companies. They may have short-term orange and red type of rating, but for cyclicals, you need to have at least a long-term green rating, that is bare minimum. You can filter all these kind of based on ratings that I'm telling you using MoneyWorks for Me filter. Uh, for stalwarts, these are green companies. Uh, Even on a 10-year X-ray, if you look at sales have been doing very decently. Uh, Consistent performance on the growth side. Uh, ROIC, that is return on invested capital minus weighted average cost of capital, that would also be consistently green. So stalwarts, yeah, green companies with a green 10-year X-ray, green short-term prospects, and green and long-term prospects. Uh, Followed by that would be say your growth companies. Uh, Very hyper growth. Even though the growth would also be looking at green, but the numbers are much more larger. Large should be larger. If you look at 10-year X-ray, the sales growth should be somewhere at least 30% plus region. But green companies on the growth side could be orange at times. Even it can be orange because the value creation might not have picked in because they have yet to create a very large business. So it can be an orange. Don't buy into red growth companies because they really do not make sense. Uh, Sales growth would be very green, but the value creation would be a bit orange at the early start of growth time. Turnaround are a bit tricky using our website because turnarounds typically would be red companies, and anyway I'm suggesting 0% to you in turnarounds because these entail very high amount of risk. We cover turnarounds, we'll be covering turnarounds using the webinar as a platform when the framework that we are using might not be very good framework to look into that kind of company like turnaround. So once we are very sure about a turnaround type of story, we'll be coming out through webinars and informing to our clients that this is a turnaround story and you can put part of it into your portfolio. Yes, Abhilash, cyclicals would be commodity-based companies like metals and mineral companies, but they will also be at times banks would also be cyclical because depending on how the interest rate cycle is going to move, they would also have cycle. When the RBI will start increasing interest rates, they will not do well because their cost of funds is going to increase, and when RBI starts decreasing interest rates, they would do in a bit tad better than they were doing before. Again, same way, companies wherein major part of the way the customer takes decision about buying their product is done on the basis of availability of credit, like real estate. Again, this would be a cyclical company. They might not do well when RBI has increased interest rates, but they would do substantially well when RBI is trying to decrease interest rates. Similarly, not two wheelers much, but auto can be a cyclical story. uh, in India, cyclicals in auto does not play so much because part of the growth that autos get in their sales also comes from their export. So at times when India might not be doing well, global markets may be doing really well, and their exports may be covering for the shortfall of the problems in the domestic sector. That was what was happening into last year with Tata Motors. The domestic business was not doing well, both at heavy commercial vehicles and even at automobiles. But the Jaguar Land Rover, the global business was really doing very well. Uh, yeah, Abhilash, again, next question is, how do I allocate 10% of my portfolio for these companies' value picks? Cyclicals are the same amount in current market environment. Uh, uh, Abhilash, if you are nearly 50% under cyclicals, uh, uh, could you just tell me the type of companies that you have invested into? Probably naming one of them, so I may give you a good idea of what to do. If Okay, now the Sesa, BHL, and Sterlite. Now, Jyoti structures. Yeah. Now, what you need to look at it is that given your risk composures, you have taken a substantial amount of risk into your uh, portfolio, uh, because you have put about 10 more 40% in excess in cyclicals. But I assume you have done it over last year. So, on a valuation basis, I am not generally uncomfortable with the choice of stocks that you have made. As such, but what you need to be comfortable with is that, let's say you may have bought into Sterlite at the rate of 110. You need to be comfortable with the fact that you may see Sterlite falling down till 85, 89, and you will still be comfortable seeing that. On a risk composure, or probably on the economic level, we probably felt that uh, person like you might not be comfortable with that kind of a scenario. That's why you were categorized as balanced. If you think it was that you may have been under certain kind of pressure at the time when you were giving your survey, you may probably want to go through it again and see if there was any change. But cyclicals 50 is very high. You just need to be comfortable with the fact that you from the price that you have bought, you may see a 15 to 20% correction from there also. This is a possibility. I'm not saying that this may happen, but this is a possibility. You need to be comfortable with that in cyclicals, because in the negative side, you need to be comfortable with the fact that the cyclicals typically will go out of favor from the market. They will not be the darlings of the market, and so even if they come with a good result, it is not, yeah, or an average result, it is not generally seen by the market, and negative, it will be seen as extremely negative by market. Like if I were to give you an example, in 2012 early, BHL came out with a statement that one of the power plants order got cancelled, and most of the probably market got berserk on that, and then they probably interpreted as if the whole of the order book is going to get cancelled for BHL. If you ask me, even today BHL is sitting on an order book that is about size of 4 to 5 years of an power plant that is going to build over next 4 to 5 years. If you were to order BHL to build a power plant just like what it was telling in 2011, he is not going to build a power plant for you unless it is about 500 megawatts capacity, and unless you are comfortable with a delivery period after 5 years. So BHL, nothing much has changed, but a small negative news, because capacity build up in the power plant was falling down. People have started taking very negative, looking at very negatively to BHL. So that has been the big reason. Otherwise, it is not as if the company has started making losses. It is not as if a company is facing a huge uh, problem on its balance sheet. Sesago and Sterlite, these are cyclicals. The big theme that Sesago and Sterlite would run for for Sesago and a company like Sesago and Sterlite would be a merger in between these two. These two both come from the same family. So once this happens, 2 or 3 years from then, I generally expect that this would either move to a stalwart or a growth company, because what is happening is Sesago is a huge cash generator and Sterlite has a huge debt, through which he is funding his growth, but he cannot use the cash from the same group company that is with Sesago to fund that. He has to borrow it. So that certain benefits will come to them as a merged entity that is today not available to them as separate entities. So I believe they would move from cyclicals to being stalwart or growth. The way the world today looks at BHP Billiton and Rio Tinto, uh, same way probably I think at least Indian market will start looking at Sesago and Sterlite. Jyoti Structures, yeah, it is cyclical. It is an extreme cyclical, very highly leveraged company. Uh, for Jyoti Structure to really do well, government needs to come up with an real solutions on real solutions for its for on the power sector side. Once that solution start coming in, Jyoti Structure should do well. Much of it's in a balance sheet amount is stuck in as debtors, as receivables from state electricity boards. So once that's restructuring of loan from of state electricity board is done by the government, uh, then we may see that the cash flow would increase. That would also mean that over a period of time the pledging will start falling down. uh, I hope this is the end of this. If you have any questions, just let me know. Or you can mail us to customer care at moneyworksforme.com. I will be very happy to help you out in this. And I welcome you into Moneyworks for Me family. Uh, if you have any problem, just get back to us. We will proactively address it. Thank you very much. Uh, it was pleasant talking with you. मैंने एड मीटिंग नहीं किया, तो को डालना तो डाल दे अभी उसको। मैंने एड मीटिंग नहीं किया है, तो को डालना डाल दे। तो ये कर दे फिर इसको।
अरे सेप्को का मैंने पता किया था, सेप्को में कुछ इन्वेंट्री अंडर कोटेड है।
हाँ हो सकता है, हेवी कमर्शियल व्हीकल्स पड़ा है उसके पास।
वैसे भी चला गया, कुछ फायदा नहीं। 30 से भी नीचे जा सकता है, वो 20s में जा सकता है। कर दो, एंड कर। इन्वेंट्री का जो कोटेशन